This is pitting the executive against the judiciary. This is where the Department of Justice has been going from day one. Trump has absolute disdain for the judiciary because that's the one thing that's going to stop him.
Right, they restrain him.
Right, that's the only thing standing between us and a dictatorship. So he, of course, hates the courts.
Welcome to the third hour of our program. On the line with us, our buddy Sabrina Hake, the federal trial attorney, over 20 years experience, specializing in First and 14th Amendment defense, contributor to numerous law journals and publications, including the Chicago Tribune. She's also the author of one of my favorite Substack newsletters. It's called The Hake Take. She spells her name H-A-A-K-E, so it's Hake Take. And Sabrina Hake, Haake.substack.com is the website for it, but you can just plug H-A-A-K-E into the search engine over there on Substack. It'll pop right up. And Sabrina, welcome back to the program. You had just a marvelous Hake Take, your newsletter, yesterday, I think it was, about the delicious Bondi Halligan smackdown. Explain. Okay, so the dismissal of the Comey and Letitia James indictments sounds kind of dry to people because it's based on a faulty appointment of an interim U.S. attorney. But it's actually very juicy because what the separations clause says is that when the president gets to appoint an interim attorney for 120 days, then it becomes the judiciary's time, their turn, because what Trump tried to do in this case is appoint another U.S. attorney, acting interim attorney, after Eric Seibert refused to file a faulty indictment against Letitia James and James Comey. He said, I'm not going to do that. There's not enough facts. It doesn't meet the law. No, thank you. So his term was continually running since May. His 120 days, the initial appointment, ran out in May. Federal judge said, okay, at that point, when you renewed him, he was still the appropriate actor. But then when he, in September, decided he's not going to file these indictments, Trump said, you're out of here, and tried to fire him and appoint another successor U.S. attorney to take his place. And that's where Pam Bondi fell down, because it's a very simple law. You get 120 days for your appointment. When that's up, the courts get to appoint the next person. Otherwise, you get some clown like Trump thinking that he can go shopping and appoint these attorneys who are unethical, who are willing to risk their law license and file these bogus indictments. That's the whole reason for this, the appointments clause and the federal statute that I cited. He got 120-day period, and that was it. So it was gratifying to see the smackdown because it was a ridiculous error and followed other errors. I totally get it. And now the Trump administration is appealing this. What will be the basis, or do you know the basis of their appeal? I don't believe we've seen anything published yet, have we?
I haven't seen the appeal. They're announcing their decision to appeal. They think that the Supreme Court will do their bidding on this, but But I think they may not, because the Supreme Court seems to be, the Federalists on the bench seem to support the expanded unitary theory, the power that Trump is seeking. When it comes to Trump, they of course clipped the wings when it was Biden seeking to step outside his authority a little bit. But when it comes to the judiciary and the preservation of the distinction between the judiciary and the executive branch, I think even the Federalists on this bench, maybe with the exception of Alito and Thomas, are going to want to hew to what the law requires, which is a federal judge. At that 120-day mark, it was up to the federal judge to appoint it, not up to Trump, and certainly not up to Pam Bondi, because otherwise you get rogue actors appointing interim attorneys to do whatever they want him to do, which, further distances the court from the law.
I get it. Was Halligan appointed by Bondi or by Trump?
Bondi, but it was at Trump's behest. She came in backdoor right after Seibert said, "I'm at." Trump said,
I got that. The reason I ask is it seems to me that both Halligan and Bondi would be putting their law licenses at risk in doing this, aren't they?
They both have put their law licenses at risk. Pam Bondi, in supervising the whole thing, tried to also come in and put her stamp on it and say, well, I authorize, I endorse what she did, trying to sort of shift the blame over to herself to say, I take responsibility for these pleadings. But then that puts her in line of getting disbarred, because the whole premise of the indictments is faulty. And now they have this label on them that these are political indictments that were sought. What attorney are they going to get to take them at this point? But I want to say a little bit about the contempt of court issue. I think Bondi has other grounds to lose her law license. Todd Blanche has grounds to lose his law license. I'm not sure Halligan really cares. I'm not sure she was ever a serious lawyer.
Yeah. Go back to being a beauty queen.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think.
By the way, I'm not saying that maliciously or whatever. She literally was a beauty queen before she became a lawyer. That's what she did for a living. So,
right. I mean, he picks all these people for how they look on camera.
Exactly.
But in terms of contempt of court, law license is separate from contempt of court. But I would rather see a very serious, like when Todd Blanche instructed one of the DOJ attorneys to say, I don't know whether Eric Seibert wrote a declination memo. This is the memo that Seibert wrote when he declined to bring the indictments against Comey and James. You write this memo, it's a standard memo saying, this is the law, this is what I found, this is why I'm not bringing the charges under the law. And of course, the reason the Department of Justice wants to keep that under the radar is because it shows that these are illegal indictments that they subsequently sought after the sitting U.S. Acting attorney declined them.
Right.
So the really juicy piece here is that Todd Blanche instructed a litigating attorney appearing before a federal court in this hearing to say, I do not know anything about the declination memo. He instructed him not to admit that it existed.
In other words, to lie.
Yeah, that is a lie. Federal trial attorneys know you can be disbarred for lying or even for failure to answer with candor, because you can't put judges in a fishing expedition to try to figure out what's going on. When they ask a question, you answer the damn thing. You don't circumvent.
Right.
And he testified that Todd Blanche told him specifically not to admit that declination memo existed.
But who would bring these charges, against any of the three of them? I mean, local bar associations, federal courts?
No, the sitting judge can seek contempt proceedings. The disbarment would be a state bar action. But in terms of whether or not this is pitting the executive against the judiciary. This is where the Department of Justice has been going from day one. Trump has absolute disdain for the judiciary because that's the one thing that's going to stop him. Right,
they restrain him.
Right, that's the only thing standing between us and a dictatorship. So he, of course, hates the courts and has no respect for them. But the line has to be drawn. You can't just let the executive ride roughshod over the judiciary. And I think the Federalists on the bench will see that as well. Yeah. We saw that when Roberts issued a bit of a reprimand earlier in this year to Trump saying, hey, if you don't agree with the federal judge, you don't impeach him, you appeal. Right. So they're going to try to preserve the distinction between their role and the executive's role. And it's something to celebrate, too.
And all of this misconduct then seems part of a larger pattern. Another example of this being, we learned today that when the Abrego Garcia and 220 other former Venezuelans, he wasn't, but they were he was El Salvadoran, but the rest of them were Venezuelans, were shipped to this hellhole concentration camp in El Salvador illegally. And the judge had said, even if the plane is in the air, turn it around and bring it back, that it was Kristi Noem herself who said, we're going to defy the judge's order. Keep going, send them down there, let them get, raped and beaten up and tortured, which they were, actually. That seems like a crime. Explain what she did wrong and what the consequences might be.
So Judge Boasberg has now reopened the criminal contempt proceedings for what Kristi Noem did. But she can plausibly say she was relying on advice of counsel. It is a little bit of a gray area. What she did clearly violated the law and the court order, but there was a written order where Boasberg said, no more deportations, turn the flights around. And then about a 50-minute gap between that oral order and the written order. And in the written order, he didn't include the language about turning the planes around. That to the American public who maybe don't understand the difference between written versus oral, they don't know that you never defy a judge's order if you want to ever practice in front of him again. That's going to be a little bit harder to sell because they won't understand that the distinction between the oral and the written doesn't really matter. So going after Kristi Noem for contempt proceedings there, I don't think is going to be as much of a, legally it's valid and it should be done. But in terms of public perception, the public's not going to understand that because they're going to come out and say, look, here's the written order. It wasn't in there. We didn't do anything wrong. We followed this written order.
Right.
The better one to go after is the Todd Blanche order in this case, in the Halligan appointment case, where he told counsel appearing before a federal judge basically to lie about the declination memo.
Yeah.
And the substance of that declination memo will implicate the entire Department of Justice for deciding to pursue bogus indictments.
Well,
so between those two, that's the stronger.
Yeah, on Noem and Boasberg's order, it didn't. I don't know if it said it, or it would certainly imply at the very least, okay, they were already in the air. The written order doesn't say in the air. Big deal. The airplane has landed in El Salvador. Turn it around and bring them back. I mean, shouldn't that have happened?
It should have, but I'm saying in the court of public opinion, when you've got 30% of the American population basically listening to anything they put on Fox News, they're going to be running the written court order that didn't say to turn the planes around, and they're going to confuse the public.
Well, I get all that. And we have about 45 seconds here before we hit a hard break. I can't stop. But I'm wondering if she's facing legal peril here, and how real that is.
Well, she's not a lawyer, so she can't be disbarred. She is facing a contempt proceeding, a criminal contempt proceeding, which can bring a jail sentence and a fine. But going after the head, one of Trump's main people, you got to make a decision about what's going to be sellable to the American public so that they understand what's happened. We need people to understand that the court of law, the rule of law, is more important than any of these decisions, and that's what's really at issue here with this, even the criminal contempt proceeding.
Well, and this was, if not a technical violation of the law, this was certainly spitting in the face of the intent of the law.
Oh, without question, without question.
Yeah, astonishing stuff. Sabrina, you are such a great resource. Thank you so much for dropping by, and let me again encourage everybody to check out your newsletter, The Haake Take, Haake, Haake Take over on Substack. It's free and it's brilliant, and you're really going to enjoy it. Sabrina, thanks a lot for dropping by.
Thanks so much. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks you, and you too, and your family.
Thanks for all you do for our democracy.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Seriously.
Hey, Thom Hartmann here. KBCS is hosting me out at Town Hall Seattle with special guest Katie Wilson on Saturday, December 6th. I'll be discussing my new book, The Last American President, speaking to the day's most pressing issues, and have a Q&A and book signing. You can get tickets now at kbcs.fm. See you there. Tag, you're it.